Hey everyone, it's Everett again, and we're back in my reading sanctuary for another installment of Marketing Lessons from Con Men. I think this is number 6. Before we get started, I want to touch on a small issue. I've had a few people, not many, but a few, contact me and say things like, you shouldn't teach people how to con other people, or con men are evil, or conning is illegal, and this kind of thing. Okay, let's get something straight. Disney and Vivid Entertainment use the same business model, or at least they did several years ago. I admittedly don't keep up with the business model that Vivid Entertainment uses on a reoccurring basis, but they, at one time a few years ago, were using the exact same business model and had for an extended period of time with regard to their movie business, with regard to Disney's movie business and Vivid's movie business. If you don't know who Vivid Entertainment is, they produce pornographic films. The method, the strategies, the things that they did while they were producing their films, the business model they use is the same. The content is vastly different, and the context is vastly different. So Disney is a much more successful company, in no small part, to being arguably a more moral, certainly a more socially acceptable company. So I'm not teaching you how to con people. I'm teaching you how to use the strategies and the business models, if you will, the techniques that con men use in order to do legitimate business, just like Disney used the strategies and techniques that Vivid Entertainment used to do a legitimate business. Some people would say the porn business is legitimate. I'm not here to argue that. Yes or no, good or bad. My point is a more widely acceptable business. So with that out of the way, we spent too much time on it already. Let's get to today's lesson. And what we're going to talk about today is what is referred to by some of the experts in the field of studying cons as the put-up. And what happens is this is when the con first meets his mark. They make assessments based on the mark, the way they look, the way they walk, the way they carry themselves, the way they speak. They make assessments based on questions they ask and the answers they get back. So you can ask people questions, and then you can feed that information back to them. And of course, I'm talking about in a one-on-one sales process now. You can ask somebody a question and feed that information back to them relatively easily. And believe it or not, many people will think that you are psychic. They will actually answer the questions, give you the information. 3 minutes later, you're feeding the information back to them, and they think that you are an amazing, perceptive, maybe even psychic person. It's the damnedest thing I've ever seen, but it happens all the time. Now, if you're doing marketing, see, that's face-to-face sales. So that's a relatively easy thing because you can get instant feedback from somebody. You ask a question, get an answer. They walk into your office or you walk into their place. You can get a sense of who they are. You can see the way that their facial expression changes based on certain things that you do or certain things that you say. You can see the way they are dressed. You can understand that person who's sitting in front of you. If you're marketing, it's a little more difficult. Now, this is where we start getting into profiling customers. You've got to be able to identify the specific things that make your marketplace unique. Now, a lot of people today are talking about how it's not that important to specifically profile your customer. I've heard people, well-known copywriters and well-known marketing people say that it's not really that necessary. Just kind of do something and roll with it. And what I really believe that is, I believe that is the result of people knowing their niche so well that they don't need to profile it because they subconsciously know it. I hope that makes sense. But if you're moving into a niche and you don't subconsciously know that niche like the back of your hand, you don't subconsciously know that prospect like the back of your hand, you've got to sit down and you've got to make a list or make a pretend person that you are going to then use to write to. The BizOp business, Dan Kennedy used to say when he was writing a BizOp letter, he would write to Al Bundy. Anyway, if you're sitting in front of a person, you have got to learn to pick up on small cues. I'm amazed how many salespeople just steamroll over the most obvious cues, much less picking up on small, minor cues, changes in tone of voice, changes in body language. If you can't pick up on these things, you're going to have a hard time as a salesman. And if you can pick up on them, you're going to get ridiculously wealthy selling. On the phone, a little harder because you only have the voice. But still, if you can pick up on these things, you're going to go way further than if you have a hard time picking up on them. And in marketing, you have to create that person, and you have to get very detailed and very in-depth about who you're writing your marketing to. Because when you do that, then you can seem like a prophet. You can seem like you're writing specifically for that person. See, that's the ideal situation. If somebody's reading your advertisement, somebody's reading your sales letter, somebody's reading your flyer, somebody's reading your email, the ideal situation is that they feel like you wrote that to them specifically. So you're going to have to really get detailed when you're profiling people. So it's a little bit longer than most tips. I also want to make sure everybody understands how important this point is. You've got to know who you're trying to sell to. Con artists just don't stumble through life trying to con everybody who comes along. They're waiting and looking for a good person to con. Salespeople who just stumble along and try to sell anybody who they can happen to run across wind up frustrated and broke. But salespeople who learn how to read body language and read tonality go way farther. They make a lot of money. And the marketer who can really dial in on who they're writing the marketing to is going to make piles of money. And don't think there is a successful marketer or copywriter out there who has not profiled their prospect in depth, whether they did it consciously on paper or whether they did it subconsciously through experience. Cheers.